Welcome to the Creative Industry Insight podcast, a podcast that looks at various roles in the creative world. I'm your host, Bobby. Today's guest, Makeup Department Head Elle Favorule, joins us to talk about their work on the staircase. Please be warned there are heavy spoilers in this episode, so sit back and relax as we jump into the conversation with Elle. Hi, Elle. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to talk to you about The Staircase, which has just finished on HBO. And yeah, I'm kind of interested to dive into how all the various looks were created for the show. So far, what I've read online as well is everybody's really, really enjoyed the show. And yeah, I'm excited to talk about it.
It was probably one of the most challenging projects that I've been on to date. But with that comes the fact that it was also the most rewarding project I've worked on. To kind of see it all come together really is blowing my mind, and to hear it's being received so well is kind of like a little overwhelming.
Yeah, well, again, it's a HBO show, so you know it's going to be top tier programming. But with the show being based on sort of true life, and you have that Netflix documentary out there, probably was something else before Netflix picked it up out there that people are still sort of captivated by it and even have a conversation surrounding it and enjoying it. Well, enjoying it might be the slightly wrong word because of the subject matter, but it's getting a lot of praise, and it is a sort of a show that I enjoyed. My parents were eager to watch it as well.
That's exciting to hear.
And I think when you know you get a certain demographic involved, I think that's like always the best litmus test about projects is, do your parents want to watch it, or are they excited to watch it just because that's just, I don't know, just one of those things, isn't it? It's like, oh, the kids are into this, maybe we should get on board.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like parents always have to be like, that was great. And then you think, did they actually watch it? But every week there was like a call from my mom and dad on speakerphone, and they were like, we have to talk about this. And I was like, whoa, I am not used to this kind of interaction. They really thoroughly got into it. And I was like, oh, okay.
No, again, like that's always what a praise though, isn't it? Right? Like your parents sort of calling you up and just being like, we have to do this, we have to discuss this, rather than, because my parents are the same. When they see that I've worked on something and then it is of zero interest of them, it's a bit like, but then when it's something they see and then they absolutely love and then just pile on with loads of questions for you, it just, I don't know, it just hits differently. And maybe that's just because it's like a parents thing, I don't know.
No, I completely agree. It's like weirdly like satisfying when you're like, it's not like necessarily an approval thing, because, I work on loads of things that they probably have never seen, but just having any sort of interest where it's like actually interactive conversation and not just like, good job, honey, is like, oh, all right, I'm enjoying this. So it was fun to kind of go on the journey with them because, I'd seen the documentary and working on it, you kind of are so close to it. So having like friends and family, like texting weekly, it was pretty crazy.
That's always good to hear, and sounding by the reaction of everybody as well. It's like, and also seeing the sort of big grin on your face about it. So it's kind of like a really good thing. And kind of stole my question as well, asking about like how you found reaction. So it's quite a nice segue to the beginning, where I guess the script lands on your desk and you read through it. It's like, but how did the project come about for you, and what is it that enticed you to take it on?
So I actually was like on my way out the door, and I get a text from Toni Collette saying, hey, I've got this amazing project. She's like, you have to do it with me. Come to Atlanta. And when Toni Collette calls, you go. So it wasn't kind of an instantaneous thing. I met with the producers, and this was, mind you, 2 or 3 weeks from prep. I was brought on like fairly last minute for such a big show. So I met with the producers, and then I had a call with the showrunners, and they gave me the first 4 scripts. And I remember sitting in bed and I was like, I am not going to get up until I finish all of these. And by the end of the 4th script, my jaw was on the floor and I called my agent and I was like, I need to work on this show, because I was a huge fan of the documentary. And I was like, I have to dive into this. So next thing you know, they're like, all right, let's do this. And we just started moving forward with, how do we do this? How? Like that was kind of the big question. And I think my favorite part about getting the project from the beginning was how collaborative my showrunners and director were. It was like a constant texting, emails, phone calls, like conversation. I feel like sometimes when you work on projects, especially, as crew, there are usually so many layers to get to the showrunners or to get to the writers or to get to the director, and being able to have like one-on-one conversations with them or like a texting relationship with them just showed how much they cared about my process, which feels I'm very grateful for that now, because I know that that's not always the case. You're not always in a texting relationship with your showrunners or your director. And so I give a lot of props to Maggie and Antonio, because they really, not only did they trust me, but we built this makeup world together, which was really kind of, you get thrown into something with 3 weeks to prep it and a massive ensemble cast. And you're like, okay, how are we going to do this? And knowing that they were there to lean on was really, really amazing.
It's funny how one text can change everything. And as you said, when Toni Collette messages you, drop what you're doing.
Yeah.
How much of a pull she has and everything. And also, I guess, with previous collaborations with her, having that sort of working relationship as well, knowing that they would trust you to come on and help them out with what they need to do. But then also on top of that, the relationship that you developed with the showrunners, as you're saying, on a text-to-text basis, going through ideas and planning everything is, well, I guess it's like a testament in yourself as well, in what you wanted to do and just how open they were to collaborate and sort of get what they needed to make it look really good on screen. But on top of that, you're mentioning you're a big fan of a documentary, and with with a show like this where it is based on real life events, and Netflix, not Netflix, but they producing the 2 sort of parts of the documentary coming out over certain year periods. How do you go about creating looks for each character without it just being a recreation process, and also putting your sort of stamp on it as well?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing for me was gathering a team of people that I could trust, because there's no way as a department head, you have to know that your team is like stronger than you in aspects so that you are fully well-rounded and prepared to literally do anything. So, getting a strong team to work with me, to be able to collaborate with, and then also kind of knowing what is our goal here? Are we doing likeness makeups? Are we doing character makeups? What are we doing? And the word that I just remember Antonio Campos, who was our director and co-showrunner, saying was, these are not likeness makeups. We're looking for the essence of the character. And that opened up a whole world for me, because I wasn't needing to do a prosthetic nose or, to create a look of the exact match for that character, which was really great because it gave me a little bit more creative freedom. We're still working within a time frame, which is crazy to think that the 2000s, early 2000s, were 20 years ago. So technically, you're kind of working on a period piece. So following, doing the trends and following the research for the late 90s, early 2000s, and then our show spanned 17 years. So like all of the wedding stuff, if I remember correctly, because this was over a year ago, I can't remember if it was the late 90s or like I think it was 2000, 2001, but it might have been the late 90s. Finding research from that all the way up to 2017. And mind you, you're not 2017 in Los Angeles or 2001 in New York. You're in Durham, North Carolina. So kind of one of the first collaborations besides talking to Antonio is walking into the world of costumes. And our costume designer, Jen Starzak, is amazing. And her boards all over, the ideas just started jumping for each character. And, we kind of had to work with each actor's look and go from there. The biggest thing more than anything was the aging makeups, and having to test all of those looks and who was going to get old age makeup. Who are we doing prosthetics? Are we going to do highlight and shadow? Then you've got the kids who are, all of the sons and daughters are in their 20s. You can't, aging them 17 years is going to look much different than aging someone like Michael Peterson, who has been through a stressful trial and prison and, you know, his life being turned upside down. So those are all factors for each character. So you kind of take them one at a time. And we did quite a few tests before we did our camera test with Colin, and we tried the prosthetic route. And I told Antonio I was totally happy to use prosthetics, but I didn't want the age makeup to be Colin Firth in age makeup. I wanted it to look like Colin Firth older. You kind of wanted Michael Stahlberg older, but you wanted, you know, the David Rudolph character to look older in a different way than Michael Peterson, for example. Like when we aged David Rudolph, after the trial, he ended up being with Sonia Pfeiffer. And so maybe he's playing golf more, maybe he's in the sun. So we aged him much differently than we aged Michael Peterson. And those are like the small character choices that you have to go off of. And all of our actors were so collaborative with us, and having small suggestions and being like, well, I think my character would do this, or I think they've been through that, so we should change this a little bit. That really helped. Sometimes it hinders because then it's like too many cooks in the kitchen, but you know, you get your ideas from Antonio and Maggie, you kind of have a direction to go, then you sit with your actors and you're like, okay, this is what we're thinking. How do you feel? Like with Toni Collette, for example, her character, all we really have is photos to go off of. So, you know, Toni and I collaborated on what this woman's world looked like outside of, you know, photos, because that's really all we had. So there was a lot that went into each individual character, and we essentially decided to go without prosthetics for most of them. Tim Guinea, who plays Michael Peterson's brother, we have a prosthetic on him. He has, as he gets older, what's called a blender piece, which is just on his forehead, so that the wig that was used could look like he had a receding hairline. So it was like we picked our moments, but Colin is just straight old age makeup. It's what's called stretch and stipple. And I feel like that process is really underlooked. The show This Is Us, I feel like they use prosthetics, but they also use stretch and stipple. And I feel like that kind of brought people back to the old school way of doing it. And I thought, what if we just use that without prosthetics? Like, how far could we take this? And when we did the camera test day, it really genuinely blew our minds how far it took Colin. And then we basically did the 2017 look, and then, okay, how can we take this down to 2010 to 2007 to 2003? So that was kind of where we started at the top and then worked our way back instead of working our way up, because we wanted to see how far it went and then could kind of tone it down from there.
You said something that really struck me, was the how saying that like 2000s were just 20 years ago. It's made me feel very old about it all. But not on top of that is the sort of different processes and choices that were made. I think a lot of films now do prefer to go for that more prosthetic look. The prosthetics look can be either done really well or sometimes take you out to what's happening.
Yeah.
I think with a show like this, where you do jump from different periods and different times, it would look kind of odd. And I think as well, if you're following the show along, and the use of prosthetics might take you out in terms of who was that person, was naturally de-aging and aging people up, you kind of grow with them, if that makes sense. You not grow with them, but you kind of follow where they are at their certain points of their life. But on top of that as well, when you're mentioning, obviously with Kathleen, because she passed away, you only had certain amount of images that you could work with, whilst with Michael and the rest of the cast, you could probably have an encyclopedia worth of images that you could probably can choose from how they should be looking at.
Yeah, and we created, my team and I created basically a Bible of all of our main family members and documentary crew members, and we had photos of all of them, as many that we could gather for each of them. So there was always like a reference. Like we got their wedding photos. We got, there were so many looks to create. And I think with jumping the timelines, my fear was that you're going to see him. I mean, the first shot of episode 1 is him in old age makeup. So, sometimes you could take that and do prosthetics, and then the next scene over is 2001. And you're like, wait. Like, and again, like you said, I don't want it to take people out of it. But the problem is it was such a seamless transition. And Colin kind of warned me about this. He was like, because this looks so real and so natural, he's like, people aren't gonna realize it's an aging makeup. So like just Emmys, for example, he was like, you're really gonna have to push for this, because he's like, people are either gonna think that that's just me and you've made me look younger, or it, like, I even had people like DMing me on social media asking me if it was VFX, like After Effects, which I was like, wow, that's really kind of cool to hear. But it's also like, oh no, hey, over here, we're makeup. Like we did more than make the girls look, their eyebrows thin in 2001 and then made them thicker in 2017. Like that is from some of the other like press stuff I've done. Those are the questions I get. And I'm like, I don't know if people actually realize that we aged up all of the actors, like even the subtle ones, like the girls in their 20s. My assistant department head was just posting some photos. And if you see the side by side of the girls, we, accentuated the roundness in their face and the roundness in their lips, and really like gave them kind of a flawless look without making them look overdone, because they're in Durham, North Carolina, 2001. And then when we age them up, you're adding such tiny, tiny details to change the shape of the face, like a little furrow in the, 11 lines between the brows, a tiny little bit of a crease in their, nasal labial fold. And those are such small details that nobody really noticed. But it was so, when you see them side by side, because when you skip scenes in the actual episodes, it happens so quickly you don't notice. But when you see them side by side, you're like, oh, wow, okay, yeah, this is a much bigger transition than we thought. So we didn't want it, again, like you said, with the prosthetics, we didn't want it to be jarring, but we wanted to find that balance of accuracy of how these people would actually age. I think the problem with prosthetics is sometimes it jumps them so far that it's like, okay, well, how would Colin Firth's face age? How would Michael Stahlberg's face age? Instead of just throwing prosthetics and giving them wrinkles and jowls, it's like, let's make them age as they would. Like, let's put the wrinkles where they would wrinkle, or, highlight and shadow where their skin would sag, versus just like throwing prosthetics to kind of deepen the process.
I do like there's a bit where you mentioned as well, the sort of attention to detail of what the characters' lives would be like in the certain time period. So as you're mentioning, Michael Stuhlbarg's character meeting new partner and getting married again, you would think his life is a little bit more relaxed and more a man of leisure, so that he would not have visible signs of stress. But then Colin Firth's character, Michael, being in prison is like, you would be probably on his toes all the time. So then you're probably not sleeping as well. You're probably obviously not eating as well, because prison food probably isn't not that nutritious. So you probably have to add those little hints as well of how he's starting to sort of come apart. And that's something that's it's those little details as well that have just clicked in my mind that you're mentioning. Is kind of just a bit like, wow, that is something that probably most people would overlook, but it is a very important in what you're doing.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, if you think about it, even just the beauty makeups that are technically not, stretch and stipple or fully age makeups, it's all these small like subtleties. For example, with Michael Stahlberg's character, David Rudolph, he had like a massive sunspot on one side of his face. And Michael was so good he had such attention to detail. With like David Rudolph's beard, for example, we colored it using Michael's natural beard to match the gray growth that he had throughout the years. So that was like a super small thing. And then we would take that age spot and we would make it bigger or smaller depending on the year, and then age him up using the stretch and stipple around the eyes, finding subtle moments. We were talking about it, and Michael was like, I feel like he's probably happier and playing more golf in his life. And that was when it clicked. We're like, let's tan him up just a tiny bit around his hairline and around the forehead to show like he's in the sun way more than Michael Peterson, who we, we like made his cheeks really ruddy and popped a lot of his veins and, added age makeup all over. When you see him in the prison, he's got it from basically like elbow down all over his face and neck. So we took him so much further than everybody else. But then even somebody like Rosemarie DeWitt, who played Candace, we decided, let's not do old age makeup on her, but let's find character pieces that are so recognizable, like her lipstick with that crazy pout that she had. And Rosemarie's got great lips. So, just using something like concealer or foundation, we would cut off her lips on the sides and make them more narrow towards the middle. And then, it's like changing little shapes and features. And then as she gets older, kind of thinning them out more and adding like contour in her nasolabial folds, giving her that look of the jowls, adding more eyeliner because now she's wearing it as like a mask while she's in court yet again. And so I think with each character, there was such a thought process. And to be honest, sometimes it happened like on the fly because the actor now has really lived in this character for maybe, let's say 3 or 4 months. And we're going to make a change. And it somehow all just seamlessly worked. I think we all got to the point where we trusted each other very quickly. So building character moments and pieces on top of what we had already established, it just kind of got easier and easier and more exciting as we went on. And we never wanted it to be over the top. Because if you really look, unless someone like Michael Peterson has gone through the unimaginable, 17 years really isn't that much for someone in their 20s, 30s, and really even 40s. So you have to kind of find a way to show the passage of time with makeup without it being like in everybody's faces. And that's what we really wanted to avoid.
Because it look very garishly if you did sort of put it in people's faces that this is, this is this time, this is that time. Whilst if you do it seamlessly, as he did on the show, I think you're more sort of just like, oh, holy shit, man, look how different he looks. He looks the same, but different. And it's the same when you see, as you mentioned, the first time you see Michael Peterson is in the sort of present, looking, old and having that grey hair, and then you go backwards. I think as well it's the little things as well that I noticed whilst watching. It's like the liver spots that you put on like people's hands and stuff like that. That's just, it makes me a little smile to myself because of the attention that somebody has put that in to make someone to age up, and those little details as well that have been put in.
Thank you for noticing that, by the way, because those were things that as Colin, his old age makeup, because it takes so long, my assistant department head and I did it together. And while I would do details on the face, she was doing the arms and the hands. And so hearing that people notice things like that is really special, because those are the small things that we're like, we're going to do this, but because it creates a whole character and a whole look, but those are the small things that a lot of people do tend to overlook. So it's nice to hear that you notice them.
Because something like that is quite distinctive on people. And I think you notice it when he's playing with the ring. And it's just because it's close up on his hands, I think as an average viewer, you wouldn't realize that actually you'll have to do makeup on his hands and arms to age that up as well, to make it look age appropriate for that time. Which is, again, I guess if you mention that to a normal person on the street, they'd be like, no, I don't believe it. I don't believe you.
Yeah, which, I mean, we had to do that throughout the whole series. When Colin as Michael Peterson was in shorts, we would airbrush like liver spots and age spots all over his legs to give it like kind of a muddled, skin look. Because Colin, takes good care of himself. And so he doesn't really have any of that. And so even in kind of the younger years, we were amping him up so that there was somewhere to go initially. I think if somebody who's got the liver spots and age spots, as they get older, they only get worse. And so adding those in the beginning. It's something in the scene where he's running around trying to clean up or take care of Kathleen after the fall, or, you know, whatever you want to call it. Those are the times and details that we are like, okay, he's in shorts now. We have to, this is where you establish it, because he's only going to get older from here.
When you're doing the sort of de-aging and aging up, were there days where you had to do both while shooting, or did they specifically schedule it so it would be one day this time period, or another day would be a different time period?
No, our shooting schedule was sort of all over the place. We had 3 blocks. So it was episodes 1 through 4, then episodes 5 and 6, and then episodes 7 and 8. So there were days Colin would start in the morning in his old age makeup for 2017. Then while he's on set, they're getting the rest of the cast ready for the next scene. So while they're shooting, we de-age him, put him back in 2001, 2003, 2007, whenever it was. So we definitely jumped around. There were some days where he was in his old age makeup all day or his young makeup all day, but there were days where it was like an hour and a half makeup in the morning, shoot a scene, clean him up, redo his makeup, then put him back out there in a different, time period. And it was pretty crazy because Sonia, who was my assistant department head, and I, by the time I would say like maybe 2 months in, got into almost this like dance where we didn't even have to say anything to each other, because we were just moving around Colin doing his makeup like so effortlessly. So I feel like having somebody like that it's like you don't even have to speak to them, you're just doing this makeup or you're cleaning it up without even having to think about it. I think that's a huge game changer, especially when the schedule is all over the place and having to match time periods and making sure everything is so accurate. That was a challenge. But that's what's fun is like, all right, we're in 2017 in the morning, and then later is our first time we see him 2010. What does that look like? We haven't shot that yet. We did, I think, 2 to 3 layers of stretch and stipple for 2017. So we're like, all right, we can't redo this, or we can't like add or take off. So you have to fully start over. So you take it off and then you add 2 layers to do 2010. So, it was a fun challenge because you sometimes had to work as quick as possible so that the rest of the crew is not waiting while they're shooting something else, and then also not skimp out on the details, because that's when you sort of miss things, is when you're like trying to change them over. But I also think one of my favorite character makeups who cannot go unmentioned was Parker Posey as Freda Black. The first thing that Antonio and Maggie had mentioned were besides the iconic eye makeup that she was always wearing, were the pock marks on her face. And so we thought, how do we create that without being over the top, without making it garish, and then being able to put beauty makeup on top of that? So we actually, really random, but my old effects makeup teacher from makeup school lives in Atlanta now. And so he actually made us the prosthetic pieces for Parker. We had there were 2 pieces on each side of her face, these small transfer pieces. And then Sonia would paint over them to give it texture. And then her and Parker were so collaborative. Like Parker loved to play. So she's like, this is what I'm wearing today. This is what I want to do. And the 2 of them would just like, paint Parker's face every day. Parker was really involved in it. So it was so much fun. And then when we got to make her older, we decided not to make her to do heavy face prosthetics, because she did gain weight after everything that she had been through. And we just decided, what would be even more jarring is just seeing her without all that makeup and really punching up the pock marks. And I think that transition was enough to really sell what she had been through.
I think it goes back to the point as well where you didn't want to make it just for it to be a recreational, but you were still, even though you had a creative freedom, you want to stay true to the character with adding those sort of little blemishes that they had and how they looked as well. Even when I'm looking now on your Instagram with the side by sides and everything, it's quite truly amazing to see the transformation of each character. And even looking at the Parker Posey character, just how much she does look like her, but also has her own sort of vibe going on as well, and sort of feel. The scene, the side by side where she's in court and and when she's smoking the cigarette.
Freda Black character specifically, I mean, everybody's wardrobe was so spot on, but those pieces that she was wearing in court, you know, in the office, they were recognizable. So I think with her, we were going for like the essence, but also we wanted people to be able to like see her eye makeup or see that dress and know like that is Freda Black. There is no way around it. That is Freda Black. And so that, to be honest, that's one of the reasons why we opted out of doing like the heavier weight prosthetics on her face, because I think, again, it's a little distracting. I think taking it too far again will take people out of it. And I think one of my like strong suits as an artist, but also as a department head, is finding like almost the subtleties in all of that, because I don't think when you're watching a show or a movie, you should be looking at the screen hyper focused on that. You should be immersed in a show, in the characters, in the dialogue, in the, you know, visuals of it all. And the last thing you want is to go from one scene to the next and you're just like, whoa, and then you can't see anything but that. And I know that that can be almost kind of for any department, you know, in a show where like the purse was on the right, then it's on the left, and it's like, then it kind of gets you focused on that. And that's what we wanted to avoid. We didn't want people to go from episode to episode, scene to scene, focusing on the makeups. We really just wanted to lend ourselves as a department to the project as a whole. I wasn't walking in there thinking like, this is where I'm going to shine. This is where I'm going to throw all my weight around. It was just like, we want to be seen and not heard kind of thing. And I think it married beautifully into all of the pieces, the, you know, production design, the costume design, sound design, like everything. It kind of just meshed so beautifully together that I'm really, really, truly proud of what we created.
Take pride in your work and make it look, and it does look incredible. There is a couple of questions one has come to, well, I've got three that have come to mind. One's already pre-prepared, but the show is presented in different sort of shooting formats. So you have what's being captured there and then you've got the documentary footage. With the different formats, does that affect how you work or how you want to present everybody on screen?
It's hard. Yes and no. I mean, with HD, you're always hyper conscious of lines and edges and making sure your blends, whether it's the old age makeup or even just beauty makeup, are seamless. I think with anything from the court or like the video footage, that kind of allows a little bit more freedom in terms of it not being so HD. You know, you would kind of have a little bit more room for error. But because those were happening simultaneously, the regular cameras and the documentary footage, you had to be spot on regardless. Like there was no, oh, today we're only shooting the court cameras, those big, you know, things on their shoulders. We were shooting it all at the same time. So I don't necessarily think it changed our kind of approach to it. I think if anything, what did change was the lighting in the prison. We were doing a lot of his like age makeups and bruises in the prison. And that prison lighting is so awful that you really have to be conscious of changing your color when inside, because there's a lot of like elements that could be missed. Like there was a lot of bruising on his face that the yellowing was almost kind of washed out because it was so yellow in the prison. So, you know, you do the makeup in the trailer and you walk him to set and you're just like, oh, this is much worse than I thought it was. So then you have to kind of go in and adjust as needed. So I think that was more, Lyle, our cinematographer, did a beautiful job throughout. So I never had to worry. But I think those moments were when you're like, okay, this is where your like quick thinking comes in, because you see it one way in the trailer, or, you know, and by the way, the prison was a real functioning prison. So his like bruise changes happened on site in a small like closet room with like really terrible lighting. So those were always the ones that I'm like the most critical of, because I know what we went through to shoot that. But you have to like be able to adjust really quickly. So it wasn't so much the cameras, but definitely the change in lighting for each like scenario. But that was really the only like part where we had to be hyper focused on it.
My girlfriend mentioned about the prison look and how all the bruising looked. Even though consciously she knew in her mind that it was makeup, but she just couldn't believe how good it looked and just how detailed it looked and everything.
Oh my God, that's so good to hear. Thank you.
And she doesn't like watch many things, so for her to sort of pick up on these little bits and bobs, I hopefully think it's something to do rubbing off on her by being into film and TV. But she was really complimentary about that and loved looking at it, and just the sort of detail put in with the bruising in the certain areas. But it's funny how you mentioned about the yellows being washed out. I might go back to those spots to see if I could spot the yellows there and how lighting can wash it out and everything.
Yeah, it really does change your approach to things. And knowing in those moments, you ask about the lighting and prep, and you get into discussions with your cinematographer, but sometimes I don't think you can visualize it till you're in there in the moment. So yeah, there were some moments that I love the way it came out. We changed the bruising progression, went up and down and up and down. And I tried to be as realistic as I could. I was consulting with a family member who's an emergency doctor. And so I was like sending her like, okay, what about this? What about this? And she was, I always like to use a real reference, like a person who can give me some validity to like, this is what it's supposed to look like. This is the age progression, and then you see it on the monitor and you're like, oh, it looks like a giant purple thing. How do I add yellow while the yellow lighting is getting rid of? So you kind of really have to like, okay, well, brown, let's figure that, let's figure this out. So those are the moments where you're like, all right, I got to figure this out on the fly, because it wasn't as saturated as I expected in terms of like the yellow canceling it out. But, we made it work in the end.
I think those are the sort of times where, you need to earn your paycheck. Be like, and I think even working on the fly, it probably propels you into more of a hyper sense of like concentration to say, I've only got a small amount of time to do this, but I will nail it and it will look really good.
Yeah.
It did. But to go to my penultimate question, what is the one piece of kit that you always had with you and helped in creating the looks for the show?
Oh, that's a hard one. I think it's hard because we did such a variety between beauty makeups and character makeups. But I guess the main thing was the stretch and stipple, like the old age makeup that we were doing, because we used it so subtly. Like even some of the girls, Odessa Young and Sophie Turner, like we had like moments of like a tiny, tiny bit around the eyes or a little bit between the eyebrows. And I think that specific product was what really kind of sold a lot of these looks. But then in terms of like a technique, I think like in our kits, it was always like a highlighting and shadow situation, because you needed to know how to sell gravity basically on their faces. And so having the ability to look at them on camera and know like, okay, like I was saying earlier, how is Colin Firth going to age? Where are we going to take that gravity? Where are we going to add a shadow, and where can we add highlight? And I think that was pretty much seen across the board in every character and it's such an old, like that's such an old school technique. And that was really what helped us transform a lot of people.
I guess with people who are not technical like yourself, when you hear about different various bits and bobs with the kits and just how important certain pieces are in what you're creating.
Yeah.
And it's just, I do like to hear, because it's for me as well, I wouldn't know what some of it is, but when somebody sort of explains, you just think, wow, that piece of kit is just as important as like a lens is to a DOP, or a boom mic is for the sound designer, and how the sort of you and the kit go hand in hand in what you're sort of establishing to do. Just to wrap it up, actually I've got two questions. That's just another one's popped into my head, so apologies. So before I ask the final question, what was your favorite look to create?
It was definitely, that's a hard one. Okay, so I guess I don't have to pick two because they were just the most fun. Rosemary's character, Candace, that was like such a because it was a beauty makeup, but it was also an aging makeup, but it was also a character makeup. So to get to combine so many elements in one character and really see what it did to her face, that was like, wow, okay, I really, really love this. But I think a tiny step above that would be Colin's 2017 look. We are so insanely proud of that because that I don't think people realize with stretch and stipple really quick, you apply this liquid. So my assistant department head, Sonia, and it had to be a double team situation. She would hold the skin stretched out taut while I'm applying this liquid. Then I grab the blow dryer, dry it, and then she's sitting there holding his skin as taut as possible. Then I add another layer. Then I grab the blow dryer and dry it. And she's holding his skin. So we were doing layers and layers of that. But what we realized throughout testing was that you had to do it in a certain direction. If you stretch the skin wrong, the wrinkles would go the wrong way. And so when you're supposed to have like, horizontal wrinkles, next thing you know, your wrinkles are going up, like, up and down, and you're like, oh God, wait, okay. So through, that process, we really like honed in on this like perfect, flawless blend, and having to do that, like, I think we would start at the jowls, then work our way up, then the forehead, the eyes, I believe were last, then the neck and the back of the neck. Like we really had this figured out. And after doing it for 7 months, it just became second nature. And seeing how massive of a change, but so slight that people almost don't even notice, that makeup was, it was quite a feat every day. And Colin Firth is a true gem to work with. He was so amazing, and we would have the best time with him. And he was so appreciative of our work that it just made it that much better. So I think Michael Peterson's 2017 would have to be my favorite.
It's funny that you mentioned the Candice look, because she has a very elegant look earlier on, that she has that sort of classical lady who's come from wealth and has sort of looked, she's the sort of person that looks after herself. With, you can imagine her going to the hairdresser quite a lot and specific types of brand of makeup, and having the sort of the best like sort of hair straighteners or curlers as well. But then it's also reflected in her costume design. Those sort of two things go hand in hand, and how they complement each other. But I do like, again, when you're talking about like the sort of behind the scenes of what you needed to do to make sure the wrinkles were put on correctly. The fact is that one person's literally holding on for dear life for it to go on properly, and then if it's not done, they've gone the wrong way, and you just think, wow, like.
And poor Colin, the patience of that man, because all right, Colin, like tilt your head to the left, stretch your neck as far as you possibly can. And then Sonia's grabbing onto his skin and stretching it as hard as she can. And it's like, it wasn't the most comfortable situation for him to be in either, because his face is being manipulated. His skin is being stretched and, blown with a blow dryer. And he was so patient and understanding of our process that I don't think, had it been anybody else, it would have looked the way it did. But he just really was so understanding. I don't even want to say tolerant, because it goes above and beyond that. Like he was really just like in it to be like, okay, this is what we have to do. And we had a blast with him. So I think it's funny, like thinking back on it now, on my social media, there's a time lapse video. So you can't really see the details because it goes so quickly, but there are moments where he's like, his neck is contorted and Sonia's like holding it. It looks like she's going to snap his neck. And it's just because you're having to like stretch his, his neck and his like chest area if it's going to be seen. So it's like, it was a lot, but working with him was so much fun, getting to create that character. So I'm really, really grateful to him.
No, that's good. It's good to hear. I'm going to be watching that time lapse just to keep an eye out when it looks like where they're manhandling poor Colin just to get the wrinkles right. But I think as well, like as an actor, if you're being aged up. At least that must be such a weird way of looking into a window of like, wow, is that what I'm going to look like in how many years' time?
Oh yeah.
It's just
The first time
that
he
would probably
saw
be
it,
the
I
scariest
remember.
thing as well.
Yeah. I remember he got so close to the mirror and was like, huh. Just like, it's like, don't worry, don't worry. This is not you right now. It's fine. This is makeup. But he was such a good sport. It was a really good time.
No, I think that would be like that with everybody as well. Just being like, wow, I better stop. Better
Yeah.
get a better skincare routine or something just to make sure that I don't look that bad
Yeah.
when I get to that age. To wrap everything up, what's next for you?
I have a few things cooking. I'm not sure what I'm going to take next. I have a few options, so I'm kind of just waiting to see what pans out. I hope that's sometime in the future the trio of Maggie, Antonio, and Colin pop back into my life, because working with them was such a joy and so creatively fulfilling that I would love to just work with them all the time. And obviously, Toni Collette is just like such a powerhouse. So I would love to kind of have any repeat offenders, but I don't have anything concrete on the books. I'm trying to wait and see which one is the one that's like meant for me. But the movie I'm on right now is through July or August, so that's going to kind of keep me busy for the rest of the summer.
Well, I'm glad to. I think once you get people that you love working with, it's important to make sure that you can keep working with them and collaborating.
Oh yeah, Colin has no choice. He's stuck with me. So are Antonio and Maggie. So
fair enough. I think on that note, with them being stuck with you, and it just means we have to look out for even better hair and makeup designing projects and keep an eye out for what you all are going to create in the future.
thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure.
No, thank you so much for joining me and taking the time to talk to me. Like, I really appreciate it.
Of course.
Thank you so much. Staircase is now, all episodes are out now, streaming on HBO. In the UK, it's all on Sky or Now TV. Elle, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Take care. And bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.